Our film starts with a black and white scene, which I assume represents whatever's happening taking place a long time ago when the world had no color. We see a woman running around with a guy readying a gun. Eventually, we find that there's a duel, and the woman is attempting to get to it in time to stop it. Well, at least it seems that way. She gets there in more than enough time to stop it, but then just stands there while one of the guys gets shot. She then shoots the guy who won the duel, followed by one of the guy's guards shooting her. We then see the guy who won is a vampire, who then feeds on and turns our protagonist, who introduces herself via voiceover as Lilith Silver. She then tells us we know nothing about vampires. After a very James Bond-esque opening credit scene, Lilith tells us how she gets bored being a vampire, and we're shown that she amuses herself via hanging out at goth bars full of people who pretend they're vampires and debate vampirism with them. She eventually leaves, and then we watch her put on some leather while fanging out a lot. She then heads to the house of some guy who's taking a bath and feeds on him. She then shoots him several times as an alarm goes off, and then shoots and bites her way off the property. After another foreshadowing of future Facebook debates where Lilith heads to her goth bar and has pretend vampires tell her how she knows nothing about real vampires, we get a flashback to her first time waking up as a vampire. We then see the vampire who turned her in a business meeting. A detective walks in and lets him know about the guy who was just murdered. It seems that Lilith's targets are all people associated with him who are identified by wearing a ring with an eye on it. The vampire then tries to convince the detective of the existence of vampires and demands he do something about the murderer. After a talk with the crime scene investigator that goes nowhere, the woman who was with the victim approaches the detective's car and asks to talk to him. We then see Lilith at a cemetery where she meets a guy whose codename is Platinum. We learn that he's the guy who gives her contracts, and the two slept together once. They then sleep together again while she interrogates him about why she wasn't warned about her last victim having guards. He then accidentally cuts himself, and she fangs out, tasting the blood off his back. He then gives her her next target. This time, it's the detective. Back with the detective, he calls a vampire, whose name we now know is Thane Blake, while he's in the middle of feeding, to let him know that the woman backed the vampire story. Back at the goth club, Lilith's friend shows her that she bought some custom fangs. A photographer shows up and asks to take pictures of them, which the other girl is more than happy to pose for with her new fangs, but he's eventually ran off looking into Lilith's eyes. We then see that the photographer was working for the detective. After some flirting, the wannabe vamp takes Lilith back to her place and they get it on. Just as they get started, Lilith shows the girl that she started her period, which is probably the worst thing that can happen when having a lesbian sexual encounter with a vampire. That results in Lilith fanging out at the taste of the blood and feeding on her, while explaining in a voiceover that the girl died happy, as she was fed on by the thing she was obsessed with. Afterwards, she sets the body on fire. After getting in a cab and dozing off, having a dream with her contact turning into her first victim, we go back to the detective where he mistakenly believes the girl from the goth club and not Lilith is the real vampire. We then get a vampire lesson from Lilith where she explains vampires can walk during the day, but doing so affects their vision. We then get another dream sequence that looks like the Sowing the Seeds of Love Tears for Fears music video. The detective heads to the witness's place to show her the photos, who then confirms that the murderer was Lilith and not the goth girl. She then explains how she watched the whole thing and was the one that had the alarm activated and stalked her to know where she hangs out. Back with Lilith, she next explains that vampires do cast a reflection. We then see that she's out with a photographer from the club for a private photo shoot. She then goes down on the guy, but then the detective shows up, so she kills the photographer before answering the door. The detective then arrests Lilith. At Scotland Yard, the detective interrogates Lilith while having garlic breath. As the detective accuses her of centuries-old crimes, the other officer, realizing what's happening, lets her go and reprimands the detective for accusing her of being a vampire, especially after he attempted to impale her with the part of a wooden chair when she flashes her fangs at him while the other officer wasn't looking. As she looks through the book of photos, we see a flashback of her making her first feed, which was on the man that shot her. They never do explain what happened to the photographer's body, though, as it would have been in the house when they arrested her, but whatever. After another acid trip on a subway car, making me think she might need to just avoid public transportation, she heads home with the detective hiding outside her home, carving a steak. She gets home and gets an update from one of her informants that all her targets are members of the Illuminati. After having a dream where Detective Price stakes her, she wakes up to a phone call from a mysterious person telling her to check her mail. In it is a VHS tape where Platinum has been captured and the kidnappers are demanding the money she was paid back for not getting the ring off the victim in the bathtub or he dies. So she gets dressed, fanging out while doing it, and as she's leaving, catches a detective trying to break into her house. He invites him in, and as he attempts to stake her, she counters him and forces the stake into his midsection. He pulls out a cross, which does nothing, and then she interrogates him. He then escapes when he opens her curtains, which blinds her long enough to distract her. Lilith then heads to the point where she was told with the money, where she finds Platinum tied up. As she goes to untie him, she's ambushed by a bunch of guys with guns led by Sethane. Much like in the beginning, she lets herself get shot a bunch of times, then turns around and has a firefight with her attackers. She gives Platinum a gun and tells him to leave, but he instead decides to stick around where he's attacked by Sethane. Sethane basically reminds her she can either die of blood loss or feed on him, but feeding him her blood to turn him would kill her because of how much she's lost. She chooses to let him die and does a stereotypical dramatic yell before feeding on his lifeless body, but pretty sure there are plenty of murdered henchmen all over that area, but hey, plot. Back with the Detective Price, he finds the PCP from the crime scene and remembers the crime scene investigator telling him that the guards used it as a painkiller and to help them feel invincible, so he uses it himself. Later that night, at Sethane's house, we see Lilith trying to sneak around two leather-clad female bodyguards. She throws a cell phone to them and threatens them. While they're distracted, she shoots them both and sneaks into the house. We then see the women are also vampires. When they wake up, Fang's out. It then tells Sethane she is there, which he already knew as we see he has surveillance everywhere. Lilith kills the hot blonde, then runs off. The detective arrives, the brunette reprimands him for her still being alive. She tells him the only way to kill a vampire is decapitation and hands him a sword. In a twist ending, after all the other hench people are dead, the detective, after being confronted with the fact that Sethane was also a vampire and being propositioned to become one, kills himself. On top of that, after a quick sword fight, we are then told that the whole situation was a part of a kinky game Sethane and Lilith play to keep from being bored over the centuries, with the winner getting to feed on the loser, and everyone else was just their pawns. Thanks for watching. If you like these recaps, please leave a like and subscribe, and hit the bell icon to know every time I update. There is now an option to be a channel member where you'll get access to exclusive recaps from late-night vampire catalogs like Showtime, Cinemax After Dark, USA Up All Night, and much more. If you want to help my channel grow, please check out my Patreon, where members can get exclusive content that can't be uploaded on YouTube, along with download options. Link is in the description.